So today, what let's say my plan is that let's discuss chapter 2, and then uh, we'll I'll start, let's say, another topic or related to what we have already discussed, grammar. Some of the things I wanted to discuss about grammar, Indian, at least perspective, the universal grammar perspective, and the kind of grammars we talk about, Western grammars, and also Indian grammars, the tradition of Indian, so to say, Indian grammatical traditions. So some of these things I thought of discussing with you before move to the next unit, but it is totally related. The next unit, which is language acquisition or all those language teaching theory and all, so it's also related. It's not like that, I'm teaching something out of the box. It is totally correlated, interrelation is there. So anyway, so let's discuss the chapter 2. And the chapter 2, I think you have read chapter 2. It is prescribing and describing, and these are the things we have already discussed in the last class. Prescribing and describing, popular and academic views of correctness. So Guy Cook's his opinion about prescribing and describing. So what I do, and I have already told you that in my course, especially applied linguistics course, it's a there will be continuous assessment. It's not like that. Something like there is a question paper is given and then you have to write the test or something. So it's a continuous assessment every day. So depending on your class performance, all other things. So let's beginning with the first line. I think it's something like so. It says somewhere. If you just look at the introduction part, it says that there is a constant tension between language. I'm not reading it the way it is written there, but let's say just trying to summarize the thing. So, and I will be asking this question to someone, and I will name one of you, and you have to unmute yourself and whatever you understand or understood so far. Then, so it says something like there is a constant tension between language as viewed by the language expert and language as everyone's lived experience. So there is a tension. So between language as viewed by the language expert, we're talking about, let's say, linguist or grammarians for that matter, and language as everyone's lived experience or other lay persons for that matter. So there is a constant tension between language as viewed by the language expert and language as everyone's lived experience. Okay, so this is the line I just simply quoting from that book. So why is there constant tension between language as viewed by the language expert and language as everyone's lived experience? So I'd like to know this from, I think, Nivnil. I think Nivnil, if you have joined, I had seen you joined. Nivnil, you can unmute yourself and just say what you have understood so far.
Sir, about the question of experience or about prescriptive or descriptive grammar?
No, that's what just now what I have.
Sir, I was not paying exact attention. I think you were talking about experience, about how language is acquired, and I'm very sorry.
Nibnil, I'm not talking about in the lecture, but especially talking about chapter 2. If you have read chapter 2, from there
Yes, sir.
itself I'm asking the question.
Yes, sir. Sir, it talks about how language acquisition happens, and basically the idea is to help students imbibe the fact that prescriptive. What I'm trying to say is that acquisition actually caters to more of experience rather than textbook knowledge, and uh, and all that.
Okay, Nibnil, so please do read chapter 2 once again. And okay, so I'm going to ask this question to Vidya Sahani. Vidya Sahani, if you could listen to me, if you can hear me, please unmute yourself. And the same question.
Yes, sir,
Uh,
to listen to you.
Yes, yes, you're audible, Vidya.
Yes, I think as Nivneel said, the difference is between the everyday user and the language expert would be that they follow certain rule and structure for in speaking and analyzing language, and everyday users are more into descriptive form of language than the prescriptive.
Okay. Uh, okay, so again, the same question. Let's say I'm going to ask this question to Lokesh. Lokesh, are you listening to me? What do you think about this?
Hello.
Yes, Lokesh. Lokesh.
Hello.
Yes, Lokesh, you are audible. Please go ahead. So, why do you think there is a constant tension between language as viewed by the language expert and language as everyone's life experience? So, share your thoughts about this.
Uh, Sir, I'm sorry, I could not understand this concept of language tension, sir.
Okay, okay. Lokesh is saying that. Okay, so okay, Lokesh. I'll discuss it why there is a tension. So anyway, so before that, Rudraksh, are you listening?
Yes, sir.
Can you go ahead, Rudraksh?
Sir, with the same, I have to explain the same thing, right?
Yeah, the same thing. The same thing.
Uh, okay, sir. According to me, I think there is a concentration between the linguist and a general user because I think that for uh, a general user doesn't have to look into the language about the intricacies of it. He doesn't have to look into the structure of it. He just uses the language to attain his different goals, that is to impart knowledge or to put his message across. But for a linguist, he has to look at a language from a very different perspective. He has to look at the structure of it, say like basically he has to look at the syntax or the phonology of it. So according to me, the aim of a linguist and a general user are very different. So that is why there is a concentration.
Okay, Rudraksh, thank you for uh, showering some lights on this. So the same question, Amitabh. Amitabh, are you listening, Amitabh? Okay, maybe there is a network problem. Amitabh, what about Tarun Tripathi? What do you think about Tarun Tripathi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Tarun,
Yeah.
please go ahead, Tarun.
About the perspectives, for a general speaker, language is just a medium to convey or to express his things or feelings. And for a linguist, it is everything that he can use to uh, for some in any type of work for in region of psychology or in region of sociology. Means it's an tool for him
Mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm.
give impact on society or people. For a,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Tarun, you would like to say something more?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we have understood so far, let's say, the way they have answered. Did you understand the people, those who are listening? Uh, Smriti has raised her hand. Smriti wants to say something. Smriti, go ahead, unmute yourself and go ahead.
So I would like to add a few things. I guess the major difference between an expert and everyone's lived experience is basically the one of the emotional and rational outlook of it. When we use language as a lived experience, you're not looking into the inherent biases that a language hold. The way people use casteist, sexist, racist language, they at times they might not be aware of the political or like the social connotations of the hierarchies that the language inherently holds. while when an expert looks at it, you are like also studying the language through language. So the language is also the subject of study, is just not a like a tool to just convey your emotions. So a language is like when a language expert looks at it, you look at it with much more caution, with much more preciseness. You have like different measures in place. So the function that it delivers in both the cases are so different. And like also the expert is more focused on also finding out the problems, solving them. So you're not just focused on like, it's very different than saying, can you please pass me a glass of water, and then like studying why the word please is used there, in what context will you be using it, and how it changes when you're talking within the hierarchies or in absence of them. So there the outlook changes. It's just not, it does not only become a medium but a subject of study.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you so much for adding those things. Okay, now next, I think Siddharth. Siddharth, you raised your hand. Siddharth,
Yes, sir.
please
Yes, sir.
unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, Siddharth, you're audible.
So, according to me, I wanted to add something like there is a constant tension. You said like
Yeah.
so. I think you cleared it yesterday. Like the you said something about the expert one or the grammarian one. They always think like what should be the standard language, and people who are not following that standard language. People generally use the non-standard language or the language which is used by a large population. I think the language is very active, and it is always changing. But not the linguists, but the grammarians, the so-called experts, they think that the language is to be preserved in the standard form, which is, I think there is a tension because they think that this is the correct form, and the speakers who actually use the language, they think that the language is evolving, and that is the tension between them.
Okay, Siddharth, thank you. Thank you so much for adding your inputs. Uh, uh, Vidya Sahani, I think you have already said you want to add something to it, Vidya?
Yes, I want to add something. When I
Yes.
was reading about native speakers, I read about cultural loyalty, a term cultural loyalty that a native speaker has. But for a language expert, it's more like a scientific study. It doesn't look at the feelings and emotions. Also, for for a native speaker, there would be there would be while speaking any language, there would be inaccurateness, clumsiness, and they won't be looking at the range of styles or the vocabulary. They would be speaking in a general manner, which a language expert won't look into it.
Okay, thank you, Vidya. So that's emotional part in emotional, and the other part, I think Smriti has already pointed out. So thank you once again. And so before I say something, if anyone are interested here, let's say to share your views, your opinion, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, sorry, sir, I don't have the raise hand option, so I have to interrupt in the middle. Very
No, no,
sorry
please
about
go
that.
ahead, Natasha. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. Sir, I think when it comes to the language experts, there is a measure of correctness, and but this correctness may also differ when we are talking when we're dividing this between the descriptivists and the prescriptivists, because for the descriptivist, it is taken that the language is going through change and the language is constantly evolving, so that will enter into the speech of the people. But the people who are speaking, they do not need to measure the correctness, because and also because linguists, they are involved in making like making language policies which will actually affect people, the population on a greater extent and with a greater impact than people who are actually speaking the language. So the language policies will decide how you teach a language, and in turn, people will learn the language in that way. So this job is a greater job, and this objective science of language, I think it's right that there is some level of precision, because if you do not have the standard model for how you can teach language, then language will be so. I mean, it's great that language is multifarious and multifaceted, but you also need a rule through which you will actually learn language in the preliminary manner.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. So so really interesting. So now let's say just you have already pointed out some of these things. Smriti has already pointed out that so when you are talking about commonly held view, let's say layman's perspective, at times it is too emotional, too emotional, and emotional when you say there are certain things, and also I think she added the point sexist, and and so there are many commonly held views. I think in Introduction to Linguistics, you must have done this course, Introduction to Linguistics, and there are many fallacies or misconception about language. So those fallacies or misconception about language. Let's say one fallacy or misconception that people say that Sanskrit is the mother of all the languages. Sanskrit is the mother of all the languages, and I think there are many people, educated people, who will keep on arguing that Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. I had to let's say argue with many people that there is no link with many African languages. Sanskrit has no link. So how could you say there are more than let's say 70 or 80 language families in the world, and Sanskrit, so, and there is no link with all those African language families and many language families in the world. So how can you say that Sanskrit is the mother of all languages? You see. So, but people, the commonly held view, the religious traditions, and there are many other things. People will say that yes. So this, so and the concept of national language also, I told you that there are many people, educated people also, they say that Hindi is the national language of India. So. It is not necessarily so. We know that if you look at read Indian Constitution, nowhere else it is mentioned that this is the national language of India. So there are many commonly held view, and so commonly held view and experts. If you talk about the experts' views, so runs contrary to deeply held view. So as I was talking about some of the misconception, if you remember. There are many misconceptions. I think some of the things I told you. So one of the misconception, let's see, I think you must have read or know that many people, they perceive that Bengali is a sweet language or Bengali is a melodious language. I think many people have this kind of misconceptions. And some languages are harsh language. Some languages are romantic language. How do you say that? Romantic language, melodious language, harsh language, I don't understand what this is. Totally based on perception. If some people, they feel that their ear, let's say, it's the way it is tuned in such a way that they perceive Bengali as sweet, but for many people, they may not perceive Bengali as sweet. I don't understand this. Maybe for some people, many South Indian languages may be more melodious. So it is totally somewhat depends on the perception level. Okay. And one person I was talking one day, and it is his understanding that it is very difficult when you are talking about Dravidian languages. They speak very fast, and as if like Rajdhani Express is passing by, when they speak any Dravidian languages. So no offense to Dravidian speakers, and so this is also one of the held view of many Indo-Aryan speakers that Dravidian languages are so fast. So it is not necessarily so. See, whichever the language we speak, especially if you look at the discourse, if you look at the structure, so it is also very fast. Let's see, the way I'm talking, it's very difficult to, and it's not only me, whoever the speaker, it is very difficult to, let's say, dissect or segregate where a particular sentence ends and where another sentence begins. It's very difficult. But somehow that kind of misconception or perception, or what we call to some extent the commonly held view, is there in the society, in a particular society. So, and those views are in contrary to the linguistics views, the kind of experts views we are talking about. Okay. So, and we have a systematic approach. So as a result, what is happening? And somewhere people I can tell you lots of misconceptions or fallacies about language. So some of those fallacies, some of the misconceptions. Okay, so I'll come back to this once again, the tension part. I'll discuss about the tension part. Before that, let's see, since I started discussing about the kind of fallacies or misconceptions, so let's say if I direct this question in a different manner, let's say, why do you think, or why people think that Bengali is a sweet language? I think we have some Bengali speakers also. So what is your opinion about this? Bengali is sweet language, or French is romantic language? Why is it so? Why this kind of perception in the society? Did you follow me? Did you get me in this? Do you think Bengali is a sweet language? Let's say, reframe the question, rephrase the question in a different manner. So let's say we have how many? Let's say 27 or 28 people present here. How many of you think that Bengali is a sweet language, or French is a romantic language? How many of you think?
Sir, can I answer that? Can I take that question?
Yes, Sanchita.
Yes, sir. Sir, as far as my opinion is considered, sir, many people consider Bengali as a sweet language. What I think is maybe some kind of syllables, some specific kind of syllables, or speech sounds are used which are soothing to the ears. Maybe that's why. That's what I could make out of my experience from the native language which I speak on a daily basis. And maybe that's how it is. In the same line, sir, Urdu is also considered very, pure and very soothing as well. And just like that, that's what my opinion is, sir.
Okay. Okay, so even Sanchita is saying that Urdu is also kind of very soothing, not really romantic, it's soothing, because she has, let's say, especially listening some Hindi songs, and that's what the lyrics. But if you look at the lyricists, they will get many words from Urdu lexicon, and but nowadays mostly Hindi songs. In the recent phenomena, it's not only about Urdu borrowings, but nowadays lots of Punjabi borrowings, taking place, and the kind of Punjabi dominance, folk songs, and not only in folk songs, in mainstream Hindi movies also. If you see all those movies, and so nowadays Punjabi is dominating, talking about the borrowing part, so especially 90s, 90s, and even 2000s. I'm not saying that Hindi is not borrowing from Urdu, but nowadays Punjabi is kind of dominating, to some extent, Anyway, so the Bengali is a sweet language, melodious language, and okay. So Adya, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. I don't know about Bengali, sir, but French is considered as a romantic language because maybe it is related with music and poetry a lot, and it has vast history of poetry. So maybe because of that.
Yeah. So,
and the misconception about Hindi is in India. Like, I was talking to my grandfather the other day. He is history professor, and even he was like arguing with me that Hindi is the national language.
Yeah. So that's what I was telling you. So these are the commonly held views. It's not only one. There are many commonly held views. As I was telling you, I was just talking about Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the mother of all languages of the world. So how can you argue with these people that how could be Sanskrit? But they have some kind of understanding, or let's say religious understanding, So God, goddesses, Saraswati, whatever the tradition you are talking about. But in different religious traditions, there are different god and goddesses also. Let's say a Babylonian tradition, god Nebu created language, and even Chinese tradition, Kangji. So there is another god, for that matter, and which created language, and for that matter, script also. So anyway, so there are different commonly held views, and but so this is where we need to understand to some extent So what I'm saying that experts view, so we try to study language objectively and try to offer solutions, and that's what applied linguistics is all about. I think Smithy also pointed out that thing, problem solving, not only pointing out to some of the problems, but also problem solving, and that's what applied linguistics is all about, you see. So, and now, and the point she also added, I think she was talking about caution and also focus. We need to be very focused also, let's say. So we should not have any ready-made kind of also answers to particular problems also, We need to study things objectively and then come out with some kind of solutions. Now what happens, let's say, and it's not only about linguistics, even in other disciplines also, in sociology, and not only in sociology, in science also. So there are different commonly held views are there which exist in the society, and if someone, let's say, gives an alternative view, even that alternative view, let's say, is scientific in nature, so people in general, they do not want to listen. So they will challenge that view. They'll question it, as if like it is wrong to some extent. Just I can tell you one of the instance here. Let's say Darwin. So Darwin's theory of evolution. So if you look at Darwin's theory of evolution, it questions the whole religious tradition. Religious tradition, I mean to say here, let's say, if you talk about the religious tradition, and especially the Christian tradition here, so Christian tradition, if you look at who created this world, so we have an entity, so that entity is God. So the God created the whole cosmos, universe, whatever you say. But if you believe Darwin's theory of evolution, then the whole theory there is being questioned. Whole theory is being questioned, let's say. So as a result, even in the 19th century, even in the 20th century, even different places in USA, in Great Britain also, even Darwin's theory were not taught. Can you believe it? Those countries, I am talking about European countries, America, and different places. So the Orthodox Christians, so whatever the commonly held view they had regarding origin of human species and whatever, for that matter, So something like, so even linguists, let's say, we have some kind of solution to a certain problem. So problem is related to language education to children, let's say. We say mother tongue should be given priority. But people will say, no, mother tongue should not be given priority because there are some other reasons. And they'll go for dominant language, and not only dominant language, and let's say, especially in today's context, nowadays context, in English. Okay. And even a particular child, try to understand that even a particular child doesn't know how to read and doesn't know how to write also. I'm talking about those children, deaf and dumb children. So there is and they do not know how to read and write. So there is a medium to some extent, the sign language we are talking about. But there is a constant effort that the children should be taught live readings, and also, let's say, the orthography, the way it is written. They are being trained in such a way that they should pronounce this word. So it's like all that kind of things. Whatever the things we look into, the clinical linguistics part also, so all this commonly held view prevails in the society. Try to understand that, So as a result, there is always a constant tension between linguist and whatever the commonly held view, is there in the society. And other thing is that the tradition of 1950s, after 1950s, what happened? Emergence of Chomsky's, so to say, the generative grammar or universal grammar. So some linguists, especially those generative linguists, they thought of themselves as if like too high of themselves, so proud that they are the boss of language experts, so to say. So the high-handedness of linguists, and their opinions to some extent isolated them from the society, because you are just proposing or flouting theories, and your theories have no contributions to the society. If you look at most of the universal grammarians and many generative grammarians, their theories, it's only somewhere in the mind, nothing exists to some extent in the reality, and totally based on intuition. So they thought of too high of themselves, and as a result, they themselves are isolated from the society. So that's what there is a constant tension between language expert and whatever the commonly held view we were talking about. You see, so so you can look at this from your own perspective, and as I was talking about, we have our own understanding about language. I think I told you in the last class that if you're talking about language, so all language are equally complex and equally capable of expressing any idea for us. All language, whichever the language we're talking about. So some people will say that, yes, you see, mainly English is better for expressing idea, or Latin is better for expressing scientific ideas, or Sanskrit is better for expressing scientific vocabulary. So they have that kind of, it's not necessarily so. Every language has this power, or what you call productivity or generation within the language. So whether you talk about new word formation, so every language is capable, not a problem. Okay, so so something like, but the commonly held view is totally different. You see, so, and we have also discussed that the kind of differences. So despite the complexity and differences, every language is systematic in its own way. So whatever the differences we look at, I think I told you in the last class that whatever the differences we look at, mainly it is somewhere in the surface level. In the underlying level, there are less differences if you're looking at language from the universal perspective, universal grammar perspective. Okay, so okay, so anyway, so all that kind of and even if you talk about the variation, language varies systematically from person to person, from area to area, from situation to situation, and some people again that kind of understanding, something like let's say uh, uh, to some extent uh, talk about normal child, so in our understanding, to some extent, any normal child born anywhere in the world, so whichever the race or geographical, social, or economic heritage, uh, and the child is capable of learning or acquiring any language, whatever the child is exposed to. So there are different kind of linguistic beliefs, the way we look at language, and the way people look at language. General people, they look at language. So linguistic beliefs or understanding, in compared to that kind of commonly held view, those commonly held view may not be necessarily true if you look at from linguistics point of view. Okay, so I think you think about it, the tension. Why is this tension in different areas of linguistics? Just I mentioned few. You will get to know more, let's say, if you just apply your mind. Okay. Now, coming back to, I think somewhere there in the chapter itself, chapter 2, Guy Cook mentions that there itself, I think in chapter 2, page number, okay, just let me say, okay, whichever the page number, So he says somewhere that young children speak idiosyncratically. So young children, and that happens, they speak idiosyncratically. So what does Guy Cook mean by this? The young children, they speak idiosyncratically. And can one of you tell me? Let me just ask this question to let me see who are there here. Irfan Ali. Irfan Ali, can you hear me? The chapter 2, Guy Cook mentions that young children, they speak idiosyncratically. And he also gives lots of examples there. So what does Guy Cook mean by this? Young children, they speak idiosyncratically.
I'm not quite sure, sir. Just like you to explain it.
Okay, Irfan. So let me direct this question to Pragya Singh. Pragya, can you hear me? Pragya, is there network problem? Can you hear me? If you can hear, just unmute yourself and go ahead. Why young children, they speak idiosyncratically? Or you may, let's say, either contrary to this view, you say yes, they do not speak idiosyncratically. Whichever the positions you take, you go ahead with that. You can say young children, they also speak systematically. I don't want to agree with Guy Cook. Okay, so Pragya, I think maybe network problem. Rupali Gaurav, I think you have also some network issues. Rupali, can you hear me? Rupali?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I am having network issues since morning, sir. I am having 2G network today.
Yes, Rupali. Yes, it happens, Rupali. So, anyway, so since I can hear Rupali, can you just say something about this? That young children speak idiosyncratically. Why? What does Guy Cook mean by this? Okay, so next person, let's say, if I know who are the people to some extent, Victoria.
Hello.
Victoria, I can hear you.
Hello.
Victoria, please go ahead, Victoria.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, Victoria, please go ahead. I can hear you, Victoria.
Yeah, sir. It was me actually, just someone else. Yeah, so about that. So hello, sir. Pragya side.
Now, Pragya, I will get back to you, Pragya.
Hello?
Let's.
Oh, sorry, sir. I was actually here it's raining and my Wi-Fi is not working today properly, so I was not able to
That's the
speak at that
problem.
time.
That's the problem with this network. Yes, Pragya, if it is okay, the network and everything is fine. Can you just say something, throw some light on this?
So can you frame the question again? I was not able to hear you properly at that time.
And what I'm saying that it's not me. It's Guy Cook is saying that young children, they speak idiosyncratically. So what does Guy Cook mean by this? The young children, they mean they speak idiosyncratically, and he also provides lots of example there in the chapter itself, and there are also explanations are given. So why is this so? That's what, Pragya, we wanted to know from your perspective. Maybe you can also throw your own perspective. What do you think about it?
So actually, I did not go through the chapter nicely. So I cannot just give my views on it.
Okay, Pragya. So let's now go to.
Sorry,
it's
sir.
okay. No problem. Please do read. It's not. You shouldn't. There is no. If you say sorry, it's okay. No problem. But you should read.
I just read it, but I did not actually go further with that, and I cannot recall myself. Sorry.
No problem. So Victoria, please, Victoria.
Yes, sir. So here Guy Cook says that children have their own way of speaking or saying things. So basically, even if the people around them are pronouncing or saying things in the correct manner, however, children's they use the, let's say, the like the more simple way in which they can kind of say that word or pronounce that word. And he also gave an example, like you said, like a sentence called "I bought it." So the children have different way of pronouncing the word "brought." Sometimes they either the front part is silent, or there's different. Yeah, it varies between the adults and the children.
Yeah. Thank you, Victorious, for sharing some light. Okay, so the whole child language acquisition perspective, you can talk about the whole first language acquisition perspective here. You see, and anyway, so Parul, I'll get back to you, Parul. Let me just direct this question to someone else. So. Nishant, can you hear me, Nishant? Okay. Irfan, you raised your hand. Irfan, you wanted to say something, Irfan? Irfan, go ahead, Irfan. Unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, more or less, Victoria mentioned the same thing. It's like it's the understanding of the child, what he uses the word in an environment is his own understanding, which others may not understand. So it's like when a child uses, say, he wants to go to a park, so he can mention like there is a one person who takes him to the park. So he won't say I want to go to the park. He will just mention the name of that person. So maybe some person's name. So it's like his understanding is that he's saying something, but others won't able to understand it unless he speaks it in a clear way, more clear way.
Okay. Okay, Irfan, thank you. So, Parul, please go ahead. Parul, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. I more or less what Irfan and Victoria said. Also, I have observed and I've read about it also that children, when they start learning language, first they start imitating. So they exactly imitate what adults speak. But later on, when they start discovering rules, they start experimenting with rules and they start overgeneralizing rules. So one example that they brought brand has been given, so it's like the child is like over generalizing the rule, and later when they understand that this rule is an exception or this rule is an anomaly, then they correct themselves. So there's like 3 stage things that's going on, like first imitation, that over generalizing and over learning, and then de-learning and relearning. So children goes through all these phases when they learn rules of language.
Okay, thank you, Parul. But one of the understanding, Parul, if you talk about imitation and reinforcement theory, which is really, dominant in the behaviorist schools, behaviorist thoughts that children, they learn or acquire language, imitating their parents or whoever in the neighborhood, and So, especially in linguistics, we don't say this. This theory is being refuted, especially imitation theory. So children, they do not learn language by imitation or by reinforcement. Okay, one of the understanding is that. So, but the next point you talk about generalization and overgeneralization. Yes, that is true. Generalization and overgeneralization, learning, relearning, and everything is taking place. That's true. But the first point, especially linguistically, we especially if you are followers of so to say this generative tradition, you will simply refute this that. Yeah, but if you are follower of behaviorist traditions, especially in the psychology, also in the psychological literature, many people they still believe that children, they learn by imitation. But especially UG perspective, universal grammar perspective, will somehow defy that. So anyway, so talking
Okay,
about
sir. Thank you.
uh, talking about child language acquisition, I'll come back to child language acquisitions, and then we'll move on to our next second language acquisition or second language learning for that matter. So now if you look at, I think if you have read the chapter, and this is the way, just we're trying to compare children's grammar, and the comparison, the standard model here is the, let's say, adults grammar. And as a result, if you compare children's grammar with adults grammar, and as you will find lots of errors or mistakes are committed by the children, and that's what Victoria is saying, that those errors will maybe committed in a different levels of the grammar, either in the pronunciation level, in the morphology level, word formation level, or also in the semantics level, or in the sentence level, in the syntax level. So there are different levels they commit some kind of mistakes. If you look at, and compare children's grammar with, let's so to say, the adults grammar. But now look at, especially you, all of you, to some extent, maybe you have your niece, nephew, whoever, let's say, in the neighborhood or at your home, you must have observed a particular child, and whichever the language they speak differently, and they speak idiosyncratically. Idiosyncratically means, let's say, to some extent differently. I won't say unsystematically, but at times idiosyncratic, let's say irregular, what you talk about, irregular way of speaking, not the common way, the way we speak. And the kind of examples I think Guy Cook gives is that I brang it, so brang, I brought it, instead of saying I brought it. So bring, so maybe has taken the generalization rule that bring, brang, so I, instead of saying brought it, so I seen it. So I seen it instead of I saw it, I seen it. And there are lots of examples, and I can tell you, I think I'll share you some of the anecdotes, especially the kind of study conducted in our center by different let's say different MPhil and PhD students, looking at the child language acquisition study. So I'll share some of the data, and maybe one of the classes. And so, but let's say my daughter, I just had a, let's say, observed and noted down, so even if you talk about my daughter name of, and she has typical, especially in the initial phase, so her name is Mahi, so she used to add na, so even she used to call her name Manin, instead of say Mahi, she used to call Manin, and Manin, let's say water, which is Pani, she used to say Panin. And there is semantic narrowing, semantic extension, all these things are taking place in the children's language, and so even cluster simplification. So once we are in the park, so the word, let's say, hippopotamus, so in the zoo, so we could see the hippopotamus there, and instead of saying hippopotamus, so she removed hippopotamus. And for us also, she simply said appa, not hippo, even appa, that kind of things, So anyway, so you can have your own anecdotes, and so our generative understanding, if you're talking about young children speak idiosyncratically, you can question this whole tradition, the way Guy Cook is saying. I can say that no, children have their own grammar. They also speak systematically. So they have their own grammar. The grammar is developing. And so there is a developing grammar because they have their own rules. And I think Parul added the next point. She said that learning, relearning or de-learning. So some of the things which is being learned in the later phase also. They get to know that which is the right rule. Slowly and gradually they come up with the right sentences, right pronunciation, and whichever. So so there are many things. If you talk about Steven Pinker, let's say there is an example. So that the father wants to correct the child uses this kind of English, give me one other spoon, daddy. Give me one other spoon, daddy. So the daddy says that, don't say, give me one other spoon. Say that, give me the other spoon. So, and this being repeated many times, and the child, lastly says that, enough, daddy. Now give me the one other spoon. So the kind of correction, the kind of reinforcement doesn't exactly takes place, you see. So children comes up with their own grammar, and the grammar is developing. So that's what. But the whole teaching methods, if you look at the whole teaching methods, that's what we'll have a survey review of the teaching methods, whichever the teaching methods we are talking about, audiolingual method, direct methods, and other methods are followed by, so to say, these behavioral traditions, and we think that we can train children. We can train children the way we can train chimpanzee, gorillas, and bonobos. The same way we can train humans also to speak another language, but it's not necessarily so. So the imitation part doesn't work, So you have to look at language from different kind of perspective. Okay. So Smriti, you want to add something?
So actually, I would want you to briefly answer something. Like I have a 3-year-old nephew. So I see the 3 phenomena working with him. Like for butterfly, he says dupperfly. And nobody in the family says that. Like nobody calls a butterfly dupperfly. But that's something we laugh on. But then that's something I remember. And he does it with a few other words too. Now, the other thing I notice, and this is a question I want to ask about the imitation theory. Now, her mother's background is such that she calls Sha ko Sa. She does not say Sha or Za for that matter. But in our family, because like my mother tongue is Khadi Boli Hindi, so we say Za, we say Sha. Nobody like messes those words. So we almost live in a joint family setup. There are a lot of adults around him. Somehow he has picked up to say like Sa and Ja. He does not say Za and Sha. So I see both the phenomena as working, that in a way he's imitating his mother, but he's not imitating all the other adults present. Like there are at least 5 or 6 others of them. He's not imitating anybody else. So you are saying, like, I get your point, maybe the children do not learn by imitating, but then like how do they select? Like how does this selective method work even when he's in his learning phase and he has multiple sources? Why is he picking up this particular one?
Okay, so Smriti, so what's the age of the child here?
He is 3 years 6 months old.
3 years, 3 to almost, let's say 3 to 4. Okay. So instead of saying butterfly, he's saying dubberfly.
Yes, he does that.
He does. Okay. So, so why I say that imitation and let's say reinforcement doesn't work, and I think you have already categorically said that even if you want that particular, what is his name?
His name is Anjaneya.
Anju? Sorry.
Anjaneya.
Anjanil.
I'd write it in the chat box.
anyway, so let's say this your nephew and so what is happening, there are different cases, nowadays you say that why this butterfly and dubberfly. So one of the things what happens, Anjan, let's also simply again simplified, it's Anjan. Okay, so Anjan, if you're talking about Anjan, one of the things nowadays what is happening, mostly this butter and dubberfly, especially in the initial stage, what happens, that can be justified. Let's say there are many sounds and the sounds mainly pa and ba, let's say, it is easily initially it is acquired, in compared to other sounds. There are different sounds, let's say fricative sounds. Many fricative sounds are acquired later. So since he's 3 years old, so there is no question to some extent that why he shouldn't say butterfly. So maybe it's a kind of idiolect kind of things in this case, looking at linguistics point of view, talking about which sounds are acquired first, so if you look at the whole sound system for that matter, and bilabial, alveolar, retroflex, velar and all other things, and try to categorize those sounds. So we have the whole study, and it's not only about one language to some extent, most of the languages in the world. And this thing, Smithy, if you look at it, this child language acquisition process is not only about similar across the languages of the world. It's not only about that, okay, it is applicable to English or Hindi, it is all across the languages what I'm talking about. And that's what the claim of universal grammar to some extent is successful. That child language acquisition, whichever the language you are talking about, it's almost the same. The kind of milestones we talk about, whichever the milestones, babbling, and all those different phrases of the child language acquisition, the babbling stage, telegraphic, and telephrastic, holophrastic stage, telegraphic stage, and the 1 or 2 word stage and all, So in this case, 3-year child, in my understanding, he must be in 2 words or 3 words, stage, So 2 words or 3 word stages. And so another thing nowadays, talking about the acquisition of the sound sa, za, and other things, what is happening, this exposure is really important. So whatever the sound sa and za, so if you look at the children nowadays, the way they speak, at times my daughter also, she speaks in different way, and because of the exposure to different TV channels also, if you talk about all those TV channels, whether it is Baby TV, Doraemon, and all other things, so easily they catch some of the things. So talking about imitation for that matter, when you are talking about, in my understanding, these are basically the exposures. These are basically exposure to the language. So let's say exposures, the kind of setting, whether it is your mother or whether the grandparents or anyone, the nanny or whoever. So these are the exposures. But when you are talking about imitation for that matter, imitation in the sense, to some extent, let's say the replica, the way, let's say parrot is imitating. Try to understand this. The way parrot is imitating, or the intelligent bird myna is imitating, or some chimpanzees and gorillas or bonobos are imitating human language to some extent. So the children, they do not imitate in the similar manner, the way those parrots, so they have their own mechanisms and they will come up their own way, So let's say for timing this butterfly and doublefly, whatever he is saying, I'm sure after 1 month or 2 months, he or she will come up with his own. So I can tell you that, let's say my daughter also, so this she started reading this, what do you call this, Hindi comics, and that Hindi comics is Pinky or Marich, Pinky or Marich. So she used to say Pinky or Miraj. So we used to correct her, Pinky or Maris. We used to correct her, it's not Pinky or but she used to say this Pinky or Miraj, and then slowly and gradually she came up with that Pinky or Marich. Now she says Pinky or Marich, So this is something really interesting. So that's what we are talking about, imitation, that kind of imitation. So it is not imitation basically. So it is basically the exposure. So the initial exposures. I'll come back to that point, initial exposures. Chomsky also talk about the initial exposures. So for Chomsky, try to understand this. For Chomsky, he says that LAD is there. LAD is, that's what language acquisition device, LAD. Language acquisition device is there. So in addition to LAD, you have to have exposure to the language. And what you are saying that, the child is imitating nanny or someone, and that is also the bad variety. not necessarily so. Maybe for certain period of time, or maybe for some time, or kind of have to have some fun also. You never know. You never know. He's doing it. Or the child, the way you want the child to speak the language, I'm sure the child is not going to speak. He has his own grammar. So and there are different phases also. Even especially here also, what happens, there are some silent phases also goes at times, so they try to learn the rules. At times, in many cases, they don't speak. They're in the silent phase also. It happens, and actually it happens with many bilingual or multilingual children, especially somewhere around 3 or 4 years. So at times, I'm not saying they're confused with the grammar of the language, but at times they're a little bit of what to do, which rules to follow, because Hindi has this kind of rules. Let's say if you talk about the gender agreement, Bengali and Hindi, so Bangla child, and at the same time learning English and Hindi, multilingual situations. So at times it's really difficult for the child. So there is a silent phase. Maybe that silent phase, and then suddenly, gradually, the child will pick up the language and will master the language. So okay, so we can discuss this I think in one of the classes later on, with more detail about this child language acquisition, first language acquisition, theory of imitation, reinforcement, okay, with many other details. Okay, so now let's move to the next question, and I think it's somewhere in the chapter itself. It's somewhere it is mentioned the voices or the languages spoken at home and in school are not always the same. If a child uses his own regional variation, what will you do as a teacher? And Guy Cook also offers some solutions. Let's say you are a teacher and a particular child uses his own regional variation. So what will you do as a teacher? So let me ask this question to Sanchita Mukherjee, Mukherjee or Banerjee. Sanchita?
I'm there.
Can you hear me,
Yes, sir.
Sanchita?
Sir, can you please? Yes, sir. Can you please repeat the question, sir?
What I said to some extent that especially in many places the language which is spoken at home is different, and the language which is spoken, let's say in school, it is different. Let's say you are a school teacher, and in the school the child uses a particular regional variety. So what will you do as a teacher? Will you scold the child, or what? What are you going to do as a teacher? What kind of approach
Sir,
you're going to
according, sir, yes, sir. If given this this situation, sir, if I am like teaching grammar or something, I will obviously go for grammar translation method, and it's obviously convenient on both sides. And if the child is using a kind of regiolect or a kind of colloquial language which I am unaware of, as a teacher, I would try to grasp the colloquial language as far as I am considered, so that I can go to the level of child to make him or her understand what he needs to understand in the class, going to the level of the child. And if the child is having a common lingo through which we can interact, then I will always obviously prefer that as well. But it's also preferable that person who is teaching goes to the level of the child, going to the level of the colloquial language or the usual language the child is using.
Okay, Sanchita, thank you. So that kind of approach I think we do need. So anyone would like to add something here? Let's say the house is open for anyone for this question. For this question, the house is open for anyone, let's say, whoever would like to add something. Okay, Smriti Chaudhary, you want to add something?
Sir, I think it's Victoria.
Victoria.
Yes. So I think there can be a balance between like the regional dialect and the dialect that and the language that they use at school. So it can balance it out.
Okay, there has to be some kind of balance between the regional variety and the standard variety which is spoken in school. Okay, but we should have a not you should not scold or eliminate the child or report to the parents. So as a teacher, I think you need to be kind of human and encourage the child to speak also. If you stop the child, because of his regional variety, so maybe in the future child may not speak, so you have to take this thing little in a serious manner with caution also. Okay, so now let's say somewhere one of the questions, and I think Guy Cook also discussed these things, and we have also discussed in the last class, and so I'm directing this question to one of our Alka Mrinalini. Can you hear me, Alka Mrinalini? Alka Mrinalini, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Be a little louder, Alka.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Alka, let's say we discussed in the last class, and even this in the chapter also, Guy Cook mentioned that somewhere in the schools or whichever the states you are talking about, they are very keen on teaching the standard language. So what are the factors the schools or the states or the government for that matter, they are keen on teaching the standard language? Why do you think so? What do you think for this,
Sir, I guess it's sort of to maintain the uniformity in the class, because at times it happens that majority of students are coming from different backgrounds, different cultural background, with different languages. So I guess just to maintain the sort of communication in a class, they do it. I mean, they can have other intentions as well, not that I'm aware of it.
Okay.
But I guess
Yes, go ahead, Alka. Go ahead.
I guess the issue arises when the authority or the institution puts down a language to make the other one superior. Like they'll say, don't you dare to speak in your mother tongue or whatever the dialect is, and you have to speak in English. You cannot speak any other language. So I mean, that's the issue regarding this whole language thing. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Alka. I couldn't hear you properly, but I could hear you, let's say, only some of the points you raised. Thank you. So the next question, somewhere in this book also it is mentioned, so when the balance of power changes, so does the notion of the standard. Okay, so the balance of power changes, so does the notion of standard. He mentioned somewhere in that chapter 2. So do you agree with this point? Let's say when the balance of power changes, so does the notion of the standard. So if you are listening, Sumit Gupta, you could unmute yourself and just throw some
Yes,
light on
sir.
this. Sumit Gupta, please
Sir,
go ahead.
can you
Sumit.
repeat your question? Sir,
So
can
the
you
question
repeat your
is
question?
that yes, Sumit. What I'm saying is that it is written in that book that when the balance of power changes, so does the notion of the standard. Notion of the standard means we are talking about standard language for that matter. So balance of power. So can you let's illuminate on this points and also try to give some examples if you could give that if it is true, if you think it is true, then you go ahead. If you do not agree with this statement, then okay. Is it clear, Sumit?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is clear, sir. Actually, I'm saying that I am very much agree with this notion that that power does changes the standardization process. We can take an example of language Mathili, which incidentally become a settled language, and because of the powerful people who speaks Mathili language, but they are
Yeah.
not. But at that time, Mathili was not very prominent on that region. But they are Mathili language is spoken by many powerful peoples, and that's why they become the Mathili language become an standard language, a standard language, and we can see these things in many for many languages, as we see English language became the official language of India because of the workings of the English persons. And we also see that Spanish is a world very official language of many countries. That's also.
Okay, thank you, Sumit. Thank you for enlightening with your own thought. Now, that's what I was saying. So, I think Sumit has pointed out, let's say, giving examples from Maithili and other examples also. So, anyone else would like to throw some light on this? When the balance of power changes, so does the notion of standard. Your own Smriti, please go ahead, Smriti.
So I guess a very simple example would be from the Mughal era, like how Persian was the standard language for all the documentation. Then came along the British, and then it became. Then they still retained some of Persian, and then they introduced English, and they actually like also taught Indians to study English. Like English was not our language. It would have been just easier to pick up any regional language and make it a standard language, but rather they enforce English on us. And like to an extent that now we treat English as a standard language. So that is like a clear case of how power changes your notion of standard. And then like the Mughal era passed, and like then the need weakened, and then came along Urdu. Now like the Karyale Hindi is a very Sanskritized form of Hindi. So the standard form has been changing all along, or how we treat and who are these people who are acquiring the language and keeping it to themselves are also powerful people. And they're always a minority but are powerful. So hence whatever idea of standard we derive comes and like is dictated by power. It's no brainer, it's a given.
Okay, thank you, Smriti. Anyone else would like to add something, and then we'll move on to the next question. Thank you, Smriti. Shivam? Yes, Shivam, go ahead, Shivam.
Sir, for example, during independence era, there was a lot of fuss about Hindi as a national language, because lots of leaders during that time in the part.
Be little louder, Shivam. Be little louder.
Lots of leaders in the parliament during that time were from North Indian states or from Hindi-speaking zone or Khadi Hindi-speaking zone. So it was very easy for that time for the leaders that they want to make Hindi as a national language, but that didn't happen. So obviously, and there was an anecdote somewhere in our linguistics book that a language is a language of army, like something. I forgot that sentence.
Language has an army behind it.
Yes, sir, something like that. So yes, of course, I am very much. I agree with your question. Yes.
Okay, Shivam. So thank you. So this is exactly the case, and I think Smriti and all of you has mentioned some of the points that and I think Sumit talked about Maithili, then also Smriti talked about Mughal as well as Persian, as well as English, rise of English. And even if you talk about rise of English, which variety? It was that time mainly the British variety. Now the emergence of American English, it is not the British variety. You know that the political power, if you look at the balance of power, you know, so now it's shifted to America, and that's what many people are learning American variety, American English for that matter, not the British variety. So you need to understand that perspective as well, you know. So okay, so and in ample cases, ample examples from Indian perspective. Let's say for that matter, Bangla for that matter, let's say Bengali for that matter. Even if you look at Bengali, so the same case with Bengali. Bengali people are here. You know, at least 2 or 3 Bengali people are here, so they have their own perspective. Let's say so. Anyway, so the emergence of American English is also in one of the glaring example, you know, to some extent. Okay, so Nibnil, you want to add something, Nibnil?
Sir, actually, I wanted to ask a question, but it's not regarding linguistics, but about English. Is that fine?
Go ahead, Nibnil. Go
Sir, I
ahead.
wanted to ask, like, on internet specifically, it is becoming very common to replace you are with your. Like we say, you're welcome, which is grammatically incorrect. So, with respect to this chapter, where do we stand on this?
So
Is it something that is going to be accepted, or is it something which is not going to be accepted, or that is what I wanted.
okay, Nibnil. So what happens? I'll tell you the whole history about it. What happens? Let's say talking about it's not we, not I. You know, so language belongs to the community. Language belongs to the people. That's what you need to understand, Nibnil. And I'll tell you, in one of the interviews, I was there with the editor of the Collins Dictionary and as well as the Oxford Dictionary. So we had a huge, let's say, talking about discussion. So talking about the new inclusion, let's say which are the new words being included in the language. So what are the ways we go ahead with it? Now we'll come to know that, let's say in English, Oxford English Dictionary, there is a time, and this is the word joy ho. Joy ho was also included in the English Oxford English Dictionary. And there have been many new words for that matter. Now, who thought the word lol, LOL, laugh out loud? Huh? Who thought that that will be included? We never understood. And initially, the people, the young generations, those who were using those kind of words, you know, lol, and there are many other, you know, ruffle, I think, rolling on the floor, laughing, you know, ruffle. So these are the words now, let's say, have come into English dictionary in the English language and accepted. So who are these people, let's say? And it is not me, it is not only you, it is whole generation, let's say, the whole people for that matter. So what is so what are the process, let's say? You just asked me about you are or you are or your, you know, mainly you are focusing on the either the pronunciation part or the written part. Which part, let's say, whichever the part is, you know. And so if you're talking about the spelling part, when you talk about the spelling part, Niblin, what happens, especially the spelling thing, it is mostly dominated by the prescriptive grammarians for that matter, and also by the commonly held view. So as a result, it is at times it's very difficult. Let's say the word color, if you look at color, COLOUR, color, is still in the British variety, it is written COLOUR. In the American variety, it is written COLOR, color. So the British variety wants to retain that, because in the written tradition, what has happened, there is a long history behind the written tradition. So somewhere people, they don't you know, get away with the. So you know, if you look at many English words beginning with pa, beginning with ka, let's say no, KNOW, no. There is a time in the history of English, the ka was also, it is not silent the way now it is. Earlier it was pronounced. Even pa, you will say that there are many words beginning with pa which is silent. So So followers of the prescriptive traditions, they will argue that we should not, so to say, should not accept that kind of changes. But on the other hand, language is always changing, Nibnil, always changing. Try to understand that. So maybe one day it will come that somewhere many people, instead of saying you are, so they may say it, and it depends on the acceptability of the language users, and how this let's say how this, so to say, the Oxford English Dictionary or Collins Dictionary and other people, they accept that particular word in the dictionary. How? There is a method. So let's say the particular word lol, let's say lol. So they will make a survey. So lol, where it is being used, let's say it is only in the electronic all these short-term messages, chatting, Facebook, WhatsApp and whatever. Let's say lol is used. So they will go to another domain, let's say some other domains, or maybe the spoken domains. Have people started using the word lol, or also in the electronic media, in some other places for that matter, print media, newspapers or something? So they will try to trace those words by this use of corpus linguistics, corpus methods, if you are aware of all that things. So then, all these people, dictionary makers, they may include the word, in that particular dictionary, So something like that. So you are whatever is that. So maybe there will be a time, and also let's say, and it's also variety. It's a variety of language use. So within that, let's say in American English, maybe the Afro-American are using one, and standard, let's say, Americans are using one variety. So which variety is to be recognized? Again, it's a matter of polity and politics at times. Try to understand this. Let's say the progressive one, I am going with simple alveolar, I am going with the velar sound. If you look at many people in their daily uses in America, in their to some extent fast English, they use the alveolar one, but somehow the standard word is I am going, the velar one, and somehow Afro-American mainly there, they use the alveolar one. So which variety has to be chosen, and this also depends on the polity and politics. There are different kind of factors, but definitely one of the factors is the acceptability factors. So if a particular group of people, they think that this is the way they should go ahead, so they'll go ahead. And we had seen lots of cases, as I already told you, inclusion of different words, in the Oxford English Dictionary. Jai ho is one of the cases, and there are many Hindi words are also taken in the English dictionary, so to say. Okay, Nibnil, did I answer your question to some extent?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, so we'll move on to our next question. And
Hello, sir. Can I say something?
yes, Natasha, go ahead.
Sir, I was reading a paper on popular culture where I came across this term called lol speak. So, like you were mentioning the LOL, so playing on the Newspeak, which is there in 1984. So, these words, like these acronyms, they are called a new form of internet dialect, and they are called lol speak.
Okay, so new form of internet, that's exactly the case. You see, that's what I was saying, So these things, it's only one of the variety, one of the domain I was talking about, Natasha. So lol is mainly somewhere in the internet, used in your Facebook, WhatsApp, and some places, and slowly and gradually the domain has increased in different places as well. So the Oxford English Dictionary, because they have to look at the language use. We cannot fantasize language the way you want to fantasize that it should be like this. It should be something like, the way Shakespeare wrote English, we need to carry. the same thing. So if you are talking about Shakespeare, and it will be very difficult for Shakespeare if he comes here today, and let's say if you place him in Great Britain, Shakespeare will be astonished, and he may not understand the way people are speaking English. So you understand that even the plural marker, if you look at the whole the pronominal systems, if you look at I, you, thou, nowadays we do not use thou. Those days thou were we in English it was used in so yeah so in one of the domains, that's what you mentioned, internet domains, lol, and there are lots of abbreviations for that matter. I can give you plenty of examples. Let's say, especially in the scientific community, the word laser, LASER, laser beam, let's say. So LASER, now it is a word, full-fledged word in English. But anyone who is from scientific background, you know that, especially physics background, physics or chemistry background, mainly physics background, you know that it's basically acronymy. LASER. Can anyone tell me what is the full
The
form
light
of laser?
amplification of stimulated emission of radiation.
See, many people, they do not understand this. Light amplification, that many people, they don't know it. Now, in the scientific community, now it is well established word laser, and from there itself, let's say someone can say that to laze, someone can create a verb, or maybe progressive one as well, lazing and whatever, So really interesting, and there are pretty ample cases of word formation we had seen, and we will see it. And the next generation were not aware of many things. You're from, let's say many people are from Delhi. The name of the place, Noida, NOIDA, Noida. I'm sure in this class, many people, they do not know what is this Noida stands for.
North Oakland Industrial Development Area.
So Nivnil, you know it, but I'm sure that many people who are joined in this class, many people, they do not know. Why is it so? Because now it is a fully fledged word, let's say. So something like, and once it has come to our knowledge, and we keep on adding or creating, but that particular word in a sentence, or maybe from that word another word, and it keeps on. So the whole history of, let's say in this case, I can talk about this gate, the whole word formation process for that matter, gate, iron gate. So the whole somewhere, if you are talking about this political scam, so now we say that cheat gate, coal gate, especially whichever the scam, political scam took place. So, but there is no gate, means it's you understand what is gate basically. But if nowadays coal gate, cheat gate, and Monica gate, in USA it was Monica gate. So why is this so? So wherever, but if you look at somehow the history of the word gate, so the first political scandal started there somewhere in Iron Gate in USA. And slowly and gradually the word gate, wherever we find it, it is associated with kind of political scandal or corruptions, whatever you are talking about. Okay, we forget the history. Forget the whole word formation process. And simply nowadays, we just recognize wherever there is a word, whether it's a coal gate, iron gate, or cheat gate, then we think that, yeah, it's kind of scandal or political scandal or corruption or something, you see. So there are many interesting cases, Natasha. But the domain, as I told you, and I also told Nivnil that domain, so the particular word has to expand its domain, not only in one domain. It has to expand in different domains, and then maybe the word may maybe added in a particular dictionary for that matter, whichever the dictionary. Okay.
Another thing, sir, if we look at a poem like Jabberwocky, I mean that was made as an entirely nonsense poem, but then words from there also have become standard English words. We use some words from the poem Jabberwocky, which is an adjective or something like that. So from nonsense, and that is we consider it as a nonsense poem.
It happens, Natasha. The reason is that, let's say, Jabberwocky, if we're talking about Jabberwocky and this whole Harry Potter series, there are many words, let's say, for that matter, because you have a whole reader and group, and English readers I'm talking about here. So there are many words, especially during this Harry Potter series, if you're talking about J.K. Rowling, So, and there are many words those days, Muggle, let's say for the Mugglehood. Mugglehood, I think if you have read Harry Potter series, many people will understand what I am talking about. Mugglehood. Anyone can tell me Mugglehood? What is Mugglehood?
Sir, who does not know magic, sir?
Yeah. So Mugglehood is basically state of being non-wizard kind of things. So this what you will find it. Muggle, there is no Muggle as such, but people understand this, Mugglehood, there is a new word creation or something. So what is happening, these are famous classic, whether it's a poem, whether it's a novel or something, and it has influenced not only one domain or the child's domain, other domains as well. And as a result, that's what I talked about, the acceptability factor, acceptability factor is very much there. And if it is accepted by the people, by the group of people, so the word will definitely survive. And other things that try to understand this, this whole word formation process, the new word formation process, what happens, we talk about these words, it has also its lifespan is also there. So some words may survive for a certain period of time, or after a certain period of time, the words may die as well. Try to understand this. We had seen in the history of English, history of many languages, words like, many political leaders, the way they come and go, we don't remember many political leaders, you see. The same way, some words for some years, let's say, or 2 years, 4 years, or 5 years, they may be, let's say, many people, they know it, but after a certain period of time, they may lose its popularity for that matter. But there are some words which are universal. It will never lose, let's say. But semantic narrowing, semantic extension also takes place. Because as language changes, semantic narrowing, semantic extension, that part. Let's say the word toilet. Earlier, the word toilet, the kind of meaning what we are talking about, restroom nowadays, toilet, the meaning of toilet was different. Even if you talk about the word dog, we are talking about, even dog, the meaning of dog has also changed. Okay, so it's not necessarily so. So, and there are many interesting things. So word changes within particular language, and even if that particular word is borrowed from one language to another language, there itself the semantic narrowing can take place, or semantic extension can take place. So I can give you one example. Let's say the word Maya. The word Maya in Hindi, what do you mean by the word Maya? Anyone Hindi speaker? Maya?
Mother.
Maya is mother, huh? Or not only mother, let's see, also some people address goddess as Maya. Is this,
Yes,
am I correct?
Durga Maya.
Yes, sir, you
Durga
are.
Maya. Yes, it's not only mother.
Sir, this is Pratiti, and so in Bengali, Maya is a dialectical form of girl, which we say May in standard Bengali, but the dialectical form of girl is Maya in Bangladeshi Bengali.
Now see, it is Maya is basically Bangladeshi Bengali. It is May, huh? May is daughter. And
Yes,
they are Pratiti. If you talk about the Rangpuri variety in Bangladesh, Maya means basically wife.
Okay, sir.
The same word.
Yes,
There
sir.
is no coincidence is taking place. I can tell you this. There is no coincidence, what coincidence? Because this is the same word stock from the Sanskrit word stock, let's say. So now
Yes,
you
sir.
see, that's what I was talking about. Semantic narrowing, semantic broadening takes place. So
Sir,
Maya,
the same thing is used in Bengali and Odia as well. Like when we talk about the term bow in Bengali, it means wife
yeah,
or the bride, but the Odia
bow is mother.
speakers, yeah, bow is mother.
Bow is mother in Odia, you know. So the same thing. See, that's what I'm saying. So semantic narrowing, semantic extension, all these things takes place, you know. So there are many interesting cases, you know. We'll see when you talk about language in general. Anyway, this is really interesting. Okay, so now next question. I think one question. So Diksha, are you here, Diksha?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask to Diksha, and the question is, let me just see in the book, guidebook. Okay, just let me switch. Okay, so somewhere in the end of the chapter, Diksha, it is written that linguists may assume a superior air and insist that their concern is with objective description. But in taking this stance, they necessarily distance themselves from people's everyday experience of language. I think this part is already discussed, but could you just share some light, shed some light, in this?
Yes, sir. I guess what he means to say by this is that very often linguists try to run away from problems like these, but applied linguists cannot because they are supposed to provide solutions to all sorts of problems that are related to language, that involve language. So, any kind of problem, they cannot even discard prescription completely because that in itself is prescription. If you say you should not prescribe language, it in itself is a prescription. So they cannot be discarding one thing. They need to find solutions which cater to both the point of views, descriptivists as well as prescriptivist. And I think that's what he says, that mostly linguists from back in the era, this problem has always existed, but they've been running away from the problem because they would say that they only have to deal with the objective description and nothing else. But this whole problem is again a problem that involves language, so they cannot ignore it, especially the applied linguists. So I guess that's what he's trying to say, and then he gives solutions how we can deal with such problems and maintain a balance.
Yes. Thank you, Diksha. Thank you. You have rightly pointed out, and think you have read the chapter carefully. So yeah. So I think I don't need to repeat what Diksha has already pointed out. Okay. So maybe one more question to. I didn't ask questions to today. Let's say, okay, let me just go to, let me just check who are here today. Okay, Sarah, are you listening, Sarah? Sarah Abdullah?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sarah Abdullah, so I have a simple question for you, what is being discussed. So, Sarah, why do we need prescriptivism?
Prescriptivism.
Why do we need prescriptivism? We talked about language, descriptivism, prescriptivism, or why do we need prescriptive grammars for that matter?
To distinguish between the language which will speak like normally or with grammar in like standard and delicates, and I think if we speak like as the children, they speak the language is in normally, and they don't focus on the grammar or as they catch from their family. But for perspective, it is we can see the language from the syntax, semantics, and the grammar, and these things which is make the language standard and more formal.
Okay, thank you, Abdullah. And see, so there are many cases. So we already discussed. Let's say even in the second language teaching, whichever the language you are teaching, whether it's Bangla, Arabic, or Hindi, English. So you have to have a standard language. You see, because every language has its variety, whether it's the regional
Yes.
variety or the social variation, whichever the variation you are talking about. So you have to choose certain standards. So prescriptive grammarians will somehow argue for that. Yes, one dialect or one variety has to be
Yeah.
so especially in the second language teaching also we need it. Let's say in the cases of speech therapy, clinical linguistics we talked about, whole language disorders we talked about, language orders. So there itself also we need this prescriptivisms, and
Yeah,
language.
because sir, when it becomes in like as you said in science and in educations, it need to say the language from the high perspective. But when it is like a normal discussion between like families and friends and social, it is not that much focused in this grammars and these things which is make the language standard. As I told you in Arabic, we have in schools and in magazines, in news, that we focus in standard Arabic because it should be like this, because it will be listened from different delegates from different people. So that's why we need to make it standard. But for conversations and normal between people and families as normal speech, it is like delicate, and we speak
Okay.
in our.
Okay, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. So, Smriti, since we do not have enough time today, Smriti, and I think this points is already discussed about the prescriptive grammars. Why do we need prescriptive grammars? So, so what? And we do not have enough time today. So, what we have so far discussed in the chapter and some other additional discussion, and please do read the chapter, otherwise. So the problem, let's say, if you just simply listen to the lecture and talk, you cannot connect to the lecture, neither the lectures, and you cannot have kind of interest also, otherwise as if like it is going ahead, going above your head. So better try to read, if a particular teacher is saying read this, please do read, and be part of the discussion, and then you'll enjoy it. Otherwise, this 2 hours, if you have not read the chapter, it will be like so boring, as if like, when this that time will end, and for my class, as you can understand that if you have read the chapter, you must have enjoyed it, like whatever the discussion we have, not only my inputs, even your friends, whichever the inputs they are providing, it's really interesting, so we learn many things from one another. So so the prescriptive perspective and descriptive perspectives we have so to say understood from chapter 2, and some of the things from that chapter itself, initially, as I was telling you, that there are different kind of linguistic beliefs, and on the other hand, there are what do you say, fallacies or misconceptions about language. So as a result, there are different tensions. So, and I think Adya has already pointed out that as a result, many people, they strongly argue that this is the right view, though it is in your understanding the academic scientific view, but other people will say that no, this is not right. Okay, so in your understanding, try to list those kind of linguistic faith and belief, and whatever the misconceptions and all, so I just simply pointed out some, whether it's a romantic language, sweet language, harsh language, So many people, they feel that German is in compared to French, German is a harsh language. Or Portuguese and Spanish, if you compare Portuguese and Spanish, somehow Spanish is considered to be more sweet or more, polite in compared to Portuguese. So the reason linguistically, if you look at Portuguese, has hold the nasalization process and nasal sounds, more nasal sounds in compared to Spanish. Anyone who knows Spanish, they know it very well, So there are different ways. You say every language has its own sound systems in different ways, whether it's a stress pattern, tone, stress, syllable time language, or rhythm time language, stress sensitive language. So every language operates in its own way. So talking about language variety, language standard, which language is standard, and in many cases, let's say, as I already told you, that somewhere even the linguistic criteria, it fails. Even the linguists, they are saying that this language is a separate language or a different language. So the politics or the government will not listen. So all the more thoughtful recommendations given by the linguist or language experts are mainly sidelined or ignored by the politicians or the governments. We had seen that in different cases, whichever the country, you will see it, you'll see it clearly, So, but in our understanding, applied linguistics should be kind of aware of the realities of the decision making. So even if you are trying to offer a solution, you should be aware of the realities. So as I told you earlier, that you should not give any kind of ready-made kind of solution to a problem. So you have to be aware of the realities of the decision making as well, okay? And because language itself, if you look at, definitely it's a lived experience and intimately involved with the people's sense of worth and identity. Language is involved with identity and culture. The whole lots of things are associated with language. We discussed about that, that part. We talked about our history, we talked about our culture, and there are many aspects. So do not offer any ready-made kind of solutions to language-related problems. And that's what I told you, that applied linguistics should not be Gallimard-free. You should not offer any kind of ready-made kind of solutions, and another thing, I think one of your friends already pointed out that, and even the discipline linguistics cannot be treated in the similar manner as astronomy or mechanics, or it cannot be treated in the similar manner, or maybe the biology subject. If you look at, you can have a particular particular organism for that matter, and you bring that organism, try to look at that organism and experiment or do kind of experiment with that particular organism. Can you do the same thing with language? You cannot do the same thing with language, So even the discipline linguistics cannot be treated in the similar manner as astronomy or mechanics or any other discipline, especially I'm talking about the scientific discipline. So even the whole generative grammar approach, if you look at the mind-brain phenomena, definitely language is the mind-brain. Universal grammar, we try to look at it. But the language user's point of view is also important. Okay, so the formal mechanisms, you can talk about this, the mental representation, mind-brain correlation, cognitive process, you can all talk about it, not a problem. You can make theory and all, but at the same time, you cannot ignore the language uses phenomena and some other things related to language, you see. So, so there are many interesting things, and as you know that nowadays, there are many languages are in the verge of extinction, and if you lose a particular language, at the same time we lose many things, and so something which is essential to nature, essential to nature, because in that particular language maybe there are many things whatever the medicinal knowledge, or many other things are there in the language itself. Knowledge, and all other informations must be ingrained there. So if a particular language is lost, that means we have to some extent lose something which is very, very essential to nature, for that matter. Okay, so so with this few lines, so I think I'll conclude, and I'll meet you the next week.